Okay, so golf news, breaking golf news. The PGA, DP Tour, and LIV Golf are set to merge together in a shocking, unexpected announcement. Now, I thought that this would happen in the fullness of time. I thought that we had a few more years of this to go before eventually common sense prevailed and we have a overreaching global tour with a global governing body. But what's happened rather quickly. And it has a lot of striking similarities with the NHL absorbing the surviving WHA teams back in 1979 and the Rugby League SuperLeague war, which ultimately led to the creation of the NRL in 1998 when we had two rival leagues competing in Australia for a while, which also had a lot of litigation, a lot of financial consequences. In fact, both the NHL versus the WHA and the Rugby League SuperLeague war had a lot of financial implications. Teams went out of business. The sports finances were impacted for a very, very long time, and it led to changes in both sports with salary caps, lockouts, strikes, you name it, it happened. So let's have a look at the Rugby League Super League war quickly, which is very, very similar to what's happened here. You had the Packer family, who owned Channel 9 in Australia, and the Murdochs, who owned Fox and obviously News Corp, set up. Well, basically, the Packers backed Australian Rugby League, which was the former New South Wales Rugby League. The Murdochs backed the Super League. And in the years leading up to 1997, basically Murdoch was trying to entice players and teams over to his new league that he wanted, his new brand of rugby league. And New South Wales Rugby League rebranded itself as the Australian Rugby League, didn't have the same amount of money and capital behind it, still had a fair bit, and both sides were handing out overinflated contracts to players in order to keep their best talent. What ends up happening is Australia Rugby League goes ahead, the Newcastle Knights win the grand final in the Australian Rugby League competition. The Super League, the Brisbane Broncos win in the Super League competition. It's not sustainable, common sense prevails. There was a lot of litigation in court. The two leagues merged together in 1998. However, several teams would basically go out of business. Some other teams had to merge together to become the dual venture clubs, of which we still have two dual venture clubs in the league today. The South Sydney Rabbitohs were basically frozen out the league for a couple of years, the biggest fan base in rugby league in Australia. The scars are still felt today in the NRL. There are complications from that, including the salary cap basically being a thing. The Melbourne Storm come into existence in part because of the Super League War. So there are some outcomes. The NHL versus the WHA is on a similar scale, just over a longer period of time, and also 20 years prior. So what happens is the WHA is set up in the mid-70s to rival the NHL, and off the bat, they're offering $1 million contracts to players. They get, Gordie Howe and his sons to go over. They get Bobby Hull, Brett Hull's father, to go, and Derek Sanderson of the Boston Bruins, Bobby Orr's teammate, to go over. Now, Derek Sanderson had the highest paid sports contract in the world at the time. He was the first $1 million sports star. These big contracts were not sustainable, but they were doing it in order to lure the players over to the new WHA. Out of that, only 4 teams survived the WHA era in 1979. They're absorbed by the NHL. Only one of them is currently still in the same original location, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. But that was sort of what was going on at the time. Was in order to try and set up their league, they had to offer cash incentives to basically underpaid players. The NHL at that time, players were not well compensated, should we say, for their services. Ultimately, it led to a change in player contracts. However, the league would not expand from 21 teams from 1979 until the early 90s. So there was a 12, 13-year period where the league stayed at 21 teams. Since the early 90s, however, we've seen the modern expansion era. Now, what the NHL did was they really hammered the WHA teams, especially the Winnipeg Jets, who were the most successful WHA team at that time. They hammered them in the WHA expansion draft, which actually, ironically, helped the Oilers basically become a better team. Hammered the Hartford Whalers as well. They took a hammering. I actually forget who the other WHA team. Only 4 WHA teams survived to be absorbed, and only one of them, as I say, is in its current original location, which is Edmonton. But both the Super League War and WHA versus NHL conflicts, basically the rival league overextended itself financially, and ultimately came back into the fold, it was realised very, very quickly that these rival leagues against the established order was not going to be sustainable. They were spending money they didn't have. And it ultimately, as I say, led to complications down the line for teams, players, fans, and league structures. What we're seeing with LIV Golf, the PGA and DP Tours, is we haven't got that legal litigation yet, which we could have, which happened in the Super League War, and I think also happened to a certain extent with the NHL versus WHA to a certain extent. Will it actually fix golf's problems? There's obviously been some negotiations in good faith and some realisation that this petty rivalry between Greg Norman and the PGA can't continue. Obviously, there is clearly the threat of litigation at some point. There probably will be. The various tournament organisers say that their tournaments are invitational, and that the PGA or the DP or the LIV can't basically say to a tournament organiser who can and can't play there. But some of the prize money is being thrown around and some of the figures being quoted are obscene. What we do know is all three tours have got some Saudi investment in them. LIV is predominantly Saudi backed, but the PGA and DP tours have got Saudi money in them as well, which doesn't sit well with a lot of sports fans. But I think this is a victory for common sense in the side of the governance of the sport and having a global tour. What they rebrand as is anyone's guess. Who will be, in charge as a commissioner, for example, is anyone's guess. Will Greg Norman have any kind of involvement in the administration side or the public face of it? Is anyone's guess, considering his acrimony and his distrust of the PGA and his spat with the PGA that goes back many, many years. The DP Tour has been struggling for quite some time financially in comparison to the PGA anyway. It's obviously rebranded from PGA Europe to the DP Tour. It's been bleeding its best talent to the PGA for a very, very long time. It's tournaments that players play for. The prize money is worth a lot less, so they're basically struggling to get by. The PGA and LIV Golf, that's where the real head-to-head's been. That's where the money in global professional golf is. But, will this fix golf's problems of its image problem, attracting new fans, attracting new players, and actually trying to grow the sport to a younger fan base? TV rights and media rights are obviously going to be a big discussion point because golf used to be on a lot of free-to-air networks around the world, very accessible. Now it's behind a paywall in a lot of countries, which makes it less accessible to the casual fan who might be interested in watching or playing. So we'll see what happens, but very unexpected news at this time. I thought it would take longer before common sense prevailed and there was a merger for a global tour, which should have happened years ago. But there you go, that's my view on things. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts on the PGA, DP Tour and LIV Golf merging together. And as I say, will this fix golf's problems? And as I say, the similarities between the Rugby League SuperLeague war in Australia and the NHL absorbing the WHA are really... We clearly haven't learned from history when it comes to setting up a rival sports organisation in the same sport and expecting it to succeed without at some point merging with the old organisation you're splitting from, which is basically what's happened. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comment section below. I will have some more content for you very, very soon.